Hi everyone, welcome to tonight's Orbit Live event with Willa, Reece, and Louisa Morgan. Willa Reece is the author of Wildwood Whispers, out last week from Red Hook. Louisa Morgan is the author of several Red Hook novels, including A Secret History of Witches and the upcoming The Great Witch of Brittany. If you aren't already familiar with their books, you can buy them or pre-order Louisa's upcoming book through the green button at the bottom of the screen that says Buy Willa and Louisa's Books. Among other topics, Willa and Louisa will be talking about their books, women's magic, and setting fantastical stories close to home. They'll also be answering your questions. Click on the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen to add one to the list, or to vote on the questions that have already been submitted by other attendees. Be sure to follow Orbit on Crowdcast if you'd like to be notified about upcoming events. You can do so by clicking Orbit Live at the top of your screen and then clicking on the green follow button. And you won't have to wait long. There's actually another event tomorrow afternoon featuring Jackson Ford and Kevin Hearn. And now I am very happy to turn things over to Willa and Louisa.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Thanks for coming.
Can you hear me fine? Is it good?
Yes.
That's good.
Yes.
Good. Well, Willa and I were talking before all of you gathered about generational magic, generational power, and having older women characters in our stories, and how much, well, I think that adds a lot of depth and perspective to the story. So, Willa, why don't you tell us a little bit about how Granny came to be in Wildwood Whispers?
I was telling Louisa earlier that in my earlier romance novel work, there's primarily the heroine and the hero, and there's some secondary characters, but it was just wonderful to have the opportunity to really delve into lots of characters with the longer length and the fantasy genre. I was able to kind of run with it. And when Granny came on the scene, she was inspired by my own mom, who is Granny to my children, and it was just a wonderful opportunity to celebrate women, and to make the power that I feel like women have literal, and the wisdom that they have. And so Granny is just this great eccentric character that I really enjoyed spending time with. One of the things about Granny is that she has pockets, thousands of hidden pockets in her multi-layer of clothes, and she always has a tisane or a tea for someone that needs a little help, and she'll reach into her pocket and pull out something. And there's some people that think you need to be a little brave to take a little bag from Granny.
That's right. I remember that in the book. Yeah, she's a great character. For me, that inherited power of women starts with my grandmother. We just found out she lied about her age so often that no one knew when she died how old she was. We just found out because as I'm moving, we're going through old papers, and by golly, she was born in 1893. We figured it out. So, wow. And she lived quite a long time. So that was my grandmother, and then my mother was a woman of just very quiet, but such strength. And I have 3 sisters, so all of us kind of have followed in that line of understanding just how strong women can be, how strong women have to be. Too often, I think, certainly in the case of my mom, she was, and my sisters as well. So it was cool. So then I got to write Harriet in The Age of Witches, and that was really
She's
fun.
my favorite.
Oh, thank you, Willa. I appreciate that. I love her.
I love her so much.
Yeah, she was, because she's sort of the quintessential wise woman. Even though, I mean, she wasn't terribly old. She was only 50, but just somebody who'd worked long and hard to acquire her wisdom and to learn how to apply her powers, her abilities. So that was a fun character to write. I liked it.
I just really enjoy the opportunity to write stories about women finding their strength. And I mean, that can happen along every step along the way you're learning. And so, even Granny had things to learn in Wildwood Whispers, but even that's always a theme in my writing, is always just empowerment and learning to stand up and learning to embrace your strength. And that's really what Wildwood Whispers is all about. And I think that's
clearly
writing witches is
I think
sort
witches,
of inherent.
I think the reason we're so enthusiastic about witches is because of that search for women's power. And of course, men can be witches too, but predominantly they are witches. Predominantly it's women who have been accused of witchcraft in the negative way. So I've always felt that we're looking. I think the reason I started was because I like to write about women finding their power.
Yeah. Definitely.
So what in your life prepared you for that? Made you think about that, about how much we learn as we grow? I don't even want to say as we age, even though we've had years. But
well, I think that Appalachian women, they're a hardy bunch. They're just a hardy bunch.
They have to be, don't they?
And all of very hard lives, and also not appreciated as much for their work and for their resilience. And they don't really get that recognition and that appreciation. They're just quietly working, and there's quiet wisdom. And I just really wanted to explore, I wanted to give them a platform that I hadn't necessarily seen them have in my actual life. And so that really led to that.
Yeah, that's I saw it in my mother, because my mother was very young during the Depression, the Great Depression. And her father, she had no mother, and her father actually farmed her out to families to take care of their children, but so she would have a place to live and food to eat. And I mean, just her whole life, she was just
hard work,
very hard. And she was so quiet about it. She was just, I asked her once how she did it, because she raised 5 children on her own. And in the meantime became a teacher and then a master teacher. She did all these amazing things, but she never complained. And I asked her once how she did it. She said, one foot in front of the other every day, just keep going. I thought, boy, that's courage for you. And a lot of women have it. They have that quiet courage, and no one recognizes it. They take them for granted.
And I
too
think
much.
that's also why I was drawn to kitchen magic and practical magic or hedge magic, is because I wanted to take that idea of a woman's place and subvert it, showing that, there's power there, and there's power in it. Because definitely the example that I had of my mother and grandmother was definitely tied to the kitchen. And I just, I wanted to celebrate it as a place of power.
Right. Well, they say the heart of the home, right? So,
right.
But I do think too often it's taken for granted, and it really is
definitely
tremendously powerful. If you think about lots and lots of homes these days where the kitchen is just a place, might be where you bring the pizza or whatever the takeout was.
The takeout.
Not in my house, but because I'm a cook, I love to cook. But for some people, I was really thrilled that when my grown son and his partner started cooking and got really into watching cooking shows, and I'm learning things from them, and I think that changes the source of energy for the partnership, for life in general.
Right.
So, well, let's talk about the herbs that come from kitchen magic. Or I really love the hedge magic idea, because it sort of encapsulates everything, all the herbs that we like to use.
Right.
And they're not always herbs that grow in the ground. Sometimes they're from trees, and there can be or shrubs that can be different things.
Right.
So you used a lot of that, and so did I.
I used a lot of that, and a lot of it was fantasy in Wildwood Whispers, because there's a wildwood garden that grows in the forest that one of the characters mentions that they're extinct. They're extinct plants in it that no one has seen for 100 years, or plants that people have never seen. So it definitely is a magical garden and a fantasy garden. But I did use several real things. Valerian tea or a Valerian tisane is very important to the story because there are nightmares in the story. And so to soothe the nightmares, Mel is given Valerian tea, which is supposed to help with anxiety and insomnia. And she ends up not drinking it because she ends up wanting to have these nightmares because she feels like her dead friend is communicating with her about some things that happened. So definitely valerian root was a huge part of the story.
And it's still being used, of course, in herbal practices today. In my book, on the other hand, in the Age of Witches, all the herbs are real. They're all, and I had a lot of fun finding out, since Harriet is an herbalist who practices in New York City, and she's right across from Central Park. I had a lot of fun researching what herbs actually grew wild in Central Park before it became more and more urbanized, of course. But so I've always said that all my witches that I write, they're all working witches. They all work with real things, and they have to learn how to do it. It's not like they just wake up one day and they can wave a magic wand or wiggle their nose. They have to really.
I loved her trip. I loved her trip to go and forage. That was awesome. And
I had so much
fun. How
fun.
it was a little bit scandalous.
And I found a map of the trees that grew wild naturally in Central Park 100 years ago. It was amazing. I mean, Central Park was really a great gift to the people in New York because it was still wild. It was still all the natural things were growing there, and I think they preserved a lot of them too. So it's really nice. So it made me think, though, because of Harriet's herbalism, and because in my family we practice a lot of herbalism. We use, if we can. I come from a medical family. My dad was a doctor. 2 of my sisters are nurses. My brother-in-law is a doctor. But we always turn to the herbal things first, because if they can do what we need doing. So then I got a little research going, trying to figure out, when did pharmaceuticals replace herbs in pharmacies, in drugstores? And it was in the 1930s, after penicillin was developed, that it really became that when you went to a pharmacy or a drugstore, like Bartell's, which started in Seattle, the very first Bartell's, you found drugs that were artificial. They were imitations of the herbs rather than the herbs themselves. And it used to be that they sold the herbs on those shelves. And the research that I was reading listed all the people that used those herbs, and witches was on the list. I was so surprised because he's a doctor of pharmacy, right? So, but he said, well, wise women and healers, and he named a couple of other things, and he mentioned witches just like that, just like it was automatic. And I thought that was great.
One of the things that happened in the Appalachians is that they were so far behind because of their isolation that they were still, when my mother was a child, they were still using granny doctors. They would still go and use the herbs because they didn't have the access to doctors and pharmacies. And so I think the tradition of herbal medicine hung on longer in the hill country, as we would say.
That's interesting.
Because it was necessity. It was just, and also they were poor, and they were very poor.
Doctors
and so
cost
they
money.
would, So like my mother's great grandmother, that's who they went to. She was the granny doctor, and
Amazing.
She delivered babies. And this would have been in the 50s. Because it was, 40s and 50s, because they're, to this day, we're a little behind here from what's going on.
Or maybe you're ahead in some ways. I think it's interesting because my father was back in the days when they called him a GP, a general practitioner, in a country practice. But because he was so interested in natural healing, as well as being a doctor and a surgeon and all that, I know I never thought about it at the time because I was a kid, but he incorporated a lot of herbal treatments into his practice, like simple things like peppermint oil for menstrual cramps, which,
Right.
actually works a lot better than the medicines that at least that were on the shelves that I remember. So it's interesting. It's great.
I have a lot of mint in Wildwood Whispers also, because I can remember as a child gathering the mint by the creek, and mint will actually blend. So you'll have they'll be growing together and the flavors will blend, so you don't have like peppermint and spearmint, you'll have mint leaves.
Mint.
And right.
Yeah,
And
cool.
we used to always, and looking back on it, I think that it was useful, and also it was useful because Mom used the mint but it was also useful in giving the children something to do.
Oh, well, what about
because we thought it was great fun.
What about ephedra leaf? Did you encounter that in any of your? Because ephedra leaf is it's a very strong herb, and it makes a wonderful. You say tisane, I say tisane, but ephedra leaf in a tea is really wonderful for pulmonary issues, like if you have bronchitis or asthma or stuffy nose. It's really but. Thanks to the glories of the government, it became very hard for people to sell it. So what do they use instead? They use pseudoephedrine, which my body can't tolerate at all. I do great with an ephedra tea, but the pseudoephedrine, I can't stand it. I can't sleep. It makes me shaky. I mean, it's just, so I'm really invested in using the original herbs where we can. And so, yeah. And I guess Harriet counts as a hedge witch in a way, doesn't she? Because she's using actual herbs. So should we take questions?
I just loved that gathering scene. Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's see. You can take the first one. You choose.
Okay, let's see. What research did you both complete in order to create realistic settings and atmospheres? Did any aesthetic movements inspire you, like cottagecore? I definitely, I did not know what cottagecore was until I was writing Wildwood Whispers. And then I realized that's, I was like, what am I writing? Is cozy gothic a thing? I felt like for the longest time I was telling myself I was writing a cozy gothic, and then I stumbled into the cottagecore. Taylor Swift. Swift released her albums, and so definitely by the time I was halfway through writing it, I did know the term cottagecore, and I use it now.
I've never heard it till this moment, so I don't actually know what it is.
It's sort of a back to nature. It's a back to nature movement, focusing on handmade things, which of course Wildwood Whispers is definitely, all of the magic in Wildwood Whispers is tied to things that are that come from or are made from the wildwood, like basket weaving with downed branches and things like that. And so that's what cottagecore is. Simplification, back to nature.
So to answer Claire's question, for me, I do immense amounts of research. I've mentioned a couple things already since if we're talking about the witches kind, I became kind of an expert on Central Park since Harriet spent so much time foraging there. And I also had to study that apartment building. All I knew about it was that John Lennon had lived there. So I didn't really know anything about the apartment building. So I had to become kind of an expert on that too.
I love the apartment building.
I know, it was really fun. And I learned so many things. It had its own electricity, which was, and it was finished in 1890, and it had its own electrical generating thing in the bottom. But anyway, that's kind of aside from the issue of cottagecore. But I think what we're both doing really is very much back to nature, because we're drawing on nature for the source of the power.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we have here. Find these questions. So this is from EB. She says,
EB.
or he, you've both written books under other names before you became Willa Reece and Louisa Morgan. The secret is out. Was it a difficult decision? Was it a difficult decision to adopt a pseudonym, or do you feel like Willa and Barbara or Louisa and Louise have different personalities? Well, I get
That's
this question a lot. Yeah, it's a great question. And sometimes the answer is a practical one. Just because you've changed genres, for example, I started my career as Louise Marley in science fiction. And what I'm writing now, I think of it as historical, actually, even though the witches make it fantastical. And I do think that the two personalities, Louise Marley and Louisa Morgan, are quite different. And the nice thing about having a pseudonym, and especially if it fits you, and it's my grandmother's name, by the way, Morgan is my grandmother's name, is that I think it sets you in the right frame of mind to create something different. So I was working really hard at science fiction, which meant science and lots of looking into the future and creating these scientific worlds. And when I write as Louisa Morgan, it's a much more internal, much more character-driven kind of fiction. And of course, witches have to love it. So that's really great. What about you, Willa?
So for me, we decided to do a pseudonym for reader expectations, because I had written primarily Gothic romance and paranormal romance, and those readers have definite expectations that you don't want to disappoint. And so even though Wildwood Whispers has a romance in it, has several romances in it, it's not the primary focus of the story. And so that's why we decided. And Ancestor.com is where I got Willa and Reece were old family names. So kind of like Louisa said, it was very comfortable for me to take old family names, and I can answer. One of the things when your name is Barbara, you are almost always called nicknames. So I've never been called Barbara, very, very rarely in my life. And so it's very comfortable for me to answer to Willa. And really same personality and same voice. It's just the focus of the story is different, because even my romances were all about empowerment and finding yourself, which is what Wildwood Whispers is about too.
Okay, your turn, Willa.
Okay, let's see. Nivea asked, wait a second,
Where's Nivea? I didn't. Oh, there she is.
I saw it to the side. I was
Hi, Nivea.
Gonna say, Nivea said, how and why did you choose the settings for your books? You go first.
Okay. I wanted to write a golden age story. So I wanted to write about I was really struck by what happened to the young women who were more or less sold for a title in England. I was a huge Downton Abbey fan. And even though Downton Abbey is less historically accurate than I like to be in my work, because they took a lot of license with a number of things, but still I was fascinated by the whole idea that an American girl would come to England and be married off with a huge dowry in order to refurbish the finances of some titled person. And so there's a wonderful book about this. I can't remember the title of it right now, but I can't remember. It's not going to come to me, but it's all about this. And it tells the stories of a bunch of these young ladies who in the late 19th century, and a lot of them were from New York in particular, went to marry English titled people. And it was hard for them because I mean, my character Annis has a better time in going over there because, for one thing, she kind of takes no prisoners in her attitudes. But they would go and they would be all exciting and have a beautiful wedding, and then they'd have a title and everybody's happy, except that everybody goes home and there they are with strangers and with a husband they barely know. And that was the part that really interested me. So I wanted to go into what is it like for them deep down, and really to be sold off. I know I used this in the book, and I hope it didn't shock anybody, but to be sold off as if they were breeding stock. So, I mean, they knew nothing. As late as the 1920s, young girls still didn't know how sex worked. They would get married, and it would be up to their poor new husband to teach them everything, because maybe he didn't know anything either. So, that was part of the burden that they would take on. So Annis would not be troubled by that, since she was breeding horses from an early age. So, so did I answer the question?
Me,
A setting. Yes. So that meant New York.
Yeah.
That meant Central Park, as I've mentioned. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And for you?
So for me, I feel like I have a Gothic voice, and the Appalachian Mountains are just ripe for Southern Gothic, because they are sort of dark and hidden and shadowy and mysterious, and even more so today in the modern world. And also, I was fascinated with this idea of the magic in ordinary things. And I take a walk every day, and I hike and walk through a wildwood, hundreds of acres of trees. And so I just became fascinated with the feel of the forest. And so that's how I decided to use a forest setting.
Cool. Okay, let's see. Penelope asks a question for either or both. Have you ever created characters that you weren't sure about in the beginning, as in, would they be a hero or a villain? Or do you have it mapped out before you start writing? That's a great question. That's really good. And it comes close to that, like, where do you get your ideas kind of thing. So go ahead, Willa. You can
You want me to do that one?
try. Yeah.
I love this. I love this because I am the type of writer who is kind of halfway in between planning and then inspiration. And so I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to do before I sit down to even start writing. But characters always surprise me. They always surprise me, and usually in really great ways. They sort of lead me, and because I do write character driven, and also in my writing, I would say that I don't really believe in hero or villain, although there are definitely villains in Wildwood Whispers, but I just feel like even your heroes have, they're shading, because I want them to be real, and I think real people struggle with their decisions. And so their decisions and their motivations. So I like to keep it real that way. And they sort of keep me along those lines. I was telling Louisa earlier when we were preparing for this that even Granny, who is the oldest character in my book, had things to learn and made mistakes, even when she was trying to do the right thing. So
Well, I completely
that's my
agree with
answer.
that.
Shades of
Right.
gray.
Shades of gray. Well, that's been stolen.
I know,
But,
I know.
but I absolutely agree. And I think the best characters are the ones that have multiple sides to them, just like real people do. I will say that I know going in what function my characters are going to serve in the story. I'm like you. I plan. I always know the ending. And usually I'm finding out at the beginning where I'm headed. But I do know what my characters are going to be. But I find out their layers as I go forward. And I mean, in the Age of Witches, the character who is a villain also I mean, I feel that by the end you have a lot of sympathy for her because of her. She has reasons to be
Yes.
the way she was, and that's the best one. I will say, I want to say this because it's the biggest challenge I've faced in creating characters are the protagonist, the one who is supposed to be the principal character in the novel. I find it so difficult to write a protagonist that you're going to love and want to follow along, but that is somehow seems real also. It's too tempting to
Relatable.
make them heroic and brilliant and beautiful and all these great qualities. But in that case, it's like Superman needs kryptonite, right? That everybody has to have their weaknesses, or you won't worry about them, and you have to be worried about the characters in order to care about following them through the story. So I hope that answers. Penelope.
Definitely. That's good. Okay, let's see. Let's see. I don't see who asked this, but writing about witches, but keeping their magic feeling more grounded and natural must be a challenge. Do you ever get tempted to veer off into Charmed or X-Men style magic and powers? And if so, how do you bring it back down to earth?
Oh, that's
Well,
a good
my
question.
mantra, magic in ordinary things, magic in ordinary things. That was like a mantra the entire time I was writing, to keep me down to earth, because I'm actually a huge fan of you know, Marvel and, extraordinary things. And so definitely I had a mantra that kept me down to earth when I was writing Wildwood Whispers.
And I
Literally.
literally, yeah. I would go back to what I said earlier about my witches are working witches. So there's no magic wands. There's no sudden. I mean, there is the assumption of power when a girl reaches her maturity, but that just makes sense for me because of the where the seat of power is, which is this is true, and we talk about this in yoga. If any of you are yoginis, you might recognize that the seat of power is in that second chakra. So that's where the menses begin, where women begin to become fully formed women. But still, I always wanted them from the beginning. When I wrote The Secret History, I wanted them to be working witches who have to learn, who have to study, who practice and make mistakes. And I can't wait till you all read Ursula's story in The Great Witch of Brittany, because she finds out that you can go too far too. And I really like that. That
I love that.
You can overstep your bounds. So that's my approach. I was never tempted to do anything where someone has lots and lots of power without having to work for it. I think that kind of power has to be earned and learned. So.
And I'm so intrigued by the struggle. And I think it mirrors the struggle that the real women I know have gone through.
Right.
Right. Yeah, with their lives. So, Mel learns from Granny, and I really loved that apprenticeship aspect of that relationship.
Here's a question from EB again. What are some of your favorite tidbits of info and trivia about the places where you live that you snuck into your stories? Well, first of all, you get a star for saying snuck, because I really like that word. So what bits of trivia sneak in? Well, I can tell you that when I wrote The Witch's Kind, which is the book before The Age of Witches, it's just the whole book is just full of inside information and backstory from the Olympic Peninsula where I was living, a place that I love very much. And so if you were to follow, you could follow those characters where they drove on the roads and where they were in Port Townsend and in Brennan, and they would all be the right places. There's just one little tiny anecdote. This is an old book of mine that I wrote as Louise Marley called The Glass Harmonica. And it's set partly in 1861 with Ben Franklin living in London. And I had him doing his electrical experiments and really being, he wasn't a bad guy, but these experiments were really hard on the poor, dumb girl they were practicing on. And after I'd already published the book, I discovered that underneath that house where he was living in London, they discovered bones, like skeletons. So something was going on in that house. And so somehow I tapped into that, even though I didn't really know it.
I would say one of the things that really influences Wildwood Whispers and the book too that I'm working on right now, set in the same Morgan's Gap, is the idea. One of the things, when you grow up in the mountains of Virginia and a small mountain town, there are always hills and hollers that you shouldn't go to for some reason or another. And usually, I mean, I would suspect that it was a still, a moonshine still was the, they're circulating stories about witches and ghosts so that you don't disturb any illicit activities. But I think that just the idea of the hidden hollows and that strongly influenced and definitely made its way into Wildwood Whispers and book 2.
So I'm going to have to find a way to work in the ghost I had in my town in Port Townsend, in my house in Port Townsend, which I haven't done yet. But I had a ghost there, and I actually saw the ghost one time. So that really belongs in a book somewhere.
And where I live and growing up, there's something you hear quite often. You're not from around here, are you? And I mean, your great grandfather might be on the settlers map, but they mean this road, this hollow.
That's funny.
You might be from this county, but this hollow, you are not from around here, are you? And so that was like a strong thread in Wildwood Whispers, because Mel was like a fish out of water. She was from, she was an outsider. And so that was definitely a strong influence.
That's great. Okay, your turn then. You'll find it.
All right, let's see. Trying to make sure that Danielle says, I would love to see Granny and the Wildwood come to life. Might there be a movie version? Well, we can all hope. I mean, that would be exciting. And thank you for wanting to see her come to life. I would love to see her come to life too. I would like my mom to see that.
That would be great.
All right, your turn.
Okay. I like this question. I don't know how well we'll answer it, but what are some of your favorite generational stories or stories featuring generations of women? Well, I have to say that's what Secret History of Witches was all about, was the generation. So the book that's coming in February, not to just talk about my own work, but I've just been obsessed with this idea of inherited power and strength, inherited magic. So
I've got a book right here. I will share. Constance Sayers.
Oh yeah, the Ladies of the Secret
The Ladies
Circus.
of the Secret Circus.
That's right.
It is really good. Really good. And it has it's generational and secrets. And yeah. So
it's
that's definitely, and also I would also say Garden Spells is also generational stories. That's Sarah Addison Allen, and that's like set in North Carolina, so it's also Southern and features generational. Yeah, Bradley.
Okay.
Yeah, I do too.
So I think it's your turn. I lost track. Is it your turn?
Okay, let's see. I think this might be Bradley again, because I recognize the little. Yeah. I see if you click on it. When starting your books, do the characters come to you first and you weave a plot around them, or does the plot appear first and you create the characters? My answer's characters. The first thing I wrote for Wildwood Whispers is the Sarah running through the woods on the damp grass. I mean, that's specific. That's specific. I woke up one morning and I was just thinking about it, and I actually had that written and had it written for several years before my agent said, "Have you thought about writing magical realism or fantasy?" So how about you, Louisa?
I don't think I can really separate them into two discrete parts, because I think my characters and my story sort of develop at the same time. Usually for me, every book comes with an image, which is kind of sounds like that's the way you started for Wildwood Whispers. I have a picture in my mind, and as I begin writing, I'm exploring that picture and finding out who the characters are. So I have a setting, I have an idea for the story, and then usually the character comes out of that, but it's really so tightly intertwined, I'm not sure I could separate them. I do know that when I'm beginning a book, I spend a lot of time choosing character names. I use baby books, I use a phone book, but I have been known to spend 2 days just choosing one name because I want it to be, I want it to express exactly how I feel about the character, how I want the character to
And
develop.
when you hit that name, that is when the character comes to life. I have a character in book 2, and I have switched her name. I think I want it to be a flower name, but I have switched it several times. So right now I keep referring her by her last name. And I know that when I hit the right name for that character, that she's gonna come to life in my head. She's a secondary character, not the main character, but I'm still waiting to get that name.
That reminds me of some of my colleagues that I've worked with in various writers groups will use placeholder names for a character. I could never do that. I have to have it.
It doesn't.
I can't even wait as long as you do. I have to have it right on the top, or else
Yeah.
I can change the name of a really minor character if they're just there briefly. But the characters that are important to the story, they just won't pop in my mind until I know exactly the right name for them.
Yeah.
So kind of harkens back to what about our pseudonyms. Like we have, how comfortable are you with the name that you've adopted? Now I've totally lost track again, Willa. I have no idea. Is it your turn? My turn?
Oh, I think it's
my turn.
Your turn.
Okay. So Claire is asking, I like this. How did the depictions of witches differ between both these novels, and what stays the same? Well, I assume you're talking about my most recent novel, which is The Age of Witches.
Yeah, I bet.
And the big difference between my witches and Willa's in her book are that my witches are essentially upper class. They're aristocrats. I mean, Harriet and her cousin actually rise up into the aristocracy, but Anna certainly is an aristocrat, and the young man that she gets involved with is an aristocrat. So that makes a big difference, because it's not. Now, Ursule in the coming book is exactly the opposite. She's she's Romany for one reason. So, and I don't know, I think our witches' practice probably isn't all that different at its core. Do you think so, Willa? I mean, it seems like since they're
I think the practice is very similar. I think, of course, in mine, valerian planted in the wildwood garden would act differently and be a lot more potent and a lot more powerful than valerian planted any old where. So I mean, that's the premise of my book, is that the wildwood actually enhances and influences, and the connection to the wildwood is actually the magic in my book, and that connection is what fuels everything.
And that is a little bit different, isn't it? Because it's that connection to the land. That's where their power is coming from. Where my witches are getting their power.
With a mystical quality, yeah.
Right. And my witches are getting their power from the generation going back decades and decades. So That does make a difference. I hope that answers
Well,
the question.
and Wildwood Whispers, the where the generational comes in is that there are just some people who have an easier time of connecting to the Wildwood.
Mm-hmm.
They're more open to it, so that's where that comes in mind. But it is definitely nature magic.
It is, yes, and I think that being open to the magic, I feel really strongly that most of us actually have a lot of abilities that because we deny them, or we think we're being silly, or we're like ignoring our impulses, or ignoring our intuition, that we cut ourselves off from that kind of natural magic. So
yeah, I believe that too.
Yeah.
I believe that too. And my family, I don't know any woman in my family who doesn't have some little spark of something.
Yeah, my family
For
is the
instance,
same.
my grandmother could not wear a watch because it would run fast around her wrist.
Isn't that
and things like
yeah.
that. And, just always little quirky things. But, what does it mean? And my mom always knows. Or she used to anyway. She has dementia now, but
I'm sorry.
my mom used to always know. She always knew
what was
she
going.
Always
Yeah,
knew
right,
things.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, my sisters are like that. Premonitions is our thing.
Yeah,
and they can be really scary, but it's better to listen to them and to honor that little flash of power that we have. So
I think a lot of people who grow up in this area, I think in the Appalachians, that's just sort of, we just accept that, Well, we just kind of accept that.
My Native American background was exactly like that. I mean, where it was part and parcel of the way you lived. It wasn't separate from your daily lives. It was part of your daily lives. So I think we inherited some of that. So do we have another question?
Hello, Books and Bears. Books and Bears Bookstore in Florence, Oregon says yay. Hello.
And somebody from Kelowna, I love it. So there's one more question here. Do you see it similar to the generational stories question? What are your favorite magical realism or historical fiction books and authors? Well, I read a lot of historical fiction. So magical realism, I never know that's what I'm reading until somebody tells me, because it all seems natural to me that we should have these experiences. So when I was reading like Water for Chocolate, which I learned afterwards was considered to be magical realism, I was just like, really? Is that what it is? I just thought it was this great story with really interesting things that happened.
I would say Midnight at the Blackbird Cafe is one of my favorites. Garden Spells. I actually love and just reread, because I was on a magical realism panel at a conference that I attended. I just reread Ray Bradbury's Dandelion Wine.
Oh,
and
yes.
Wonderful book. I love it because it is also magic in ordinary things.
Right. It really is.
And so I love that.
It's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just read Magic Lessons by what's her name? Help me, somebody.
Alice Hoffman.
Alice Hoffman, that's it. And I thought I really, really liked it. It was a bit episodic, but it was the story of this young witch who goes to so many different places and ends up in Salem, of all places. But it was really convincing. It was very different from her. I think it's the third of the magic books she's written. But it was very different, and I thought it was really, really good. Liked it. Do we have any more questions? Have we gotten to most of them?
I think that we've got them.
Well, we have to answer this. What are you working on now? I think you've already told us you're working on
I'm working on this another book set in Morgan's Gap. It's not a sequel. It's a standalone, but it is. It's actually set in 1969 in Morgan's
Historical.
Gap in
Yeah.
1969.
Wow.
Yeah, sort of.
That's interesting,
I
Willa,
was
because
born in 1971, so it is historical.
it is for you. That's
And
so
I'm really
funny.
it's a great time period because it was such a tremendous, so many
Oh, yes.
changes and turmoil and people finding their voices. And that's another thing that Wildwood Whispers is about, is finding your voice. And also just the aspect of a marginalized community finding their voice, because it's not the mainstream evangelical part of the community. And so, yeah, so that's what right now I'm working on, a second book set in Morgan's Gap. And it's going to be called Wildwood Magic. I have a definite title.
Oh, good for you. That's a good one. That's a good title.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I'm working in the same period for my the
Oh.
book that's coming. The book that comes in February, The Great Witch of Brittany, is already done. So I'm working on
Right.
my next book, and it's set in that same exact period, the Summer of Love in San Francisco, LSD, flower children, all of that kind of thing, and a little bit, and then about 10 years later in the Pacific Northwest. So same thing, same period. And you're right, it is a period of such, I mean, it's really a ripe time to tell a story in, because so many things were happening, so much was changing. Oh, thanks, Bradley.
I'm trying to read
I'm reading
at the
these
same
notes.
time.
I can't type. I can't type and think at the same time. Did we get all the questions? I think there's one more, Willa. Well, what's
Yeah,
something you
let's
read,
see,
watched, or listened to lately that you loved?
Oh, this I could talk about forever. Right now I'm watching Ted Lasso, and I absolutely adore it because it's it's very earnest and smart and funny, and I love it. I don't know if I haven't watched anything with witches lately.
I did.
I mean, oh my gosh, the trailer for the next Spider-Man movie dropped today, and it has Doctor Strange in it, and it was awesome. Okay, Louisa, you go.
Well, I just recently, because I was curious, I had seen it when I was very young. I watched Bell, Book, and Candle, which is an old and very fun movie.
Is that Angela Lansbury?
No.
Is Angela Lansbury in that?
No, not
That's
Angela
Bed
Lansbury.
Knobs and Broomsticks. I'm sorry.
Oh, I have to watch that too, I guess. No, it has Kim Novak is the principal character, and she's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. But the trouble was, when I was young, I didn't think about it. But I got to the end of watching Bell, Book, and Candle, and I realized we would call that a cliche now, because the witch, in the end, gives up her power for the romance. I know.
I hate that.
I hate it
that
too. I watched it all the way through, and then I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. It's exactly the opposite. She should get more and more power, so that her romantic involvement she's in charge. She's not just like being the victim to, what was it? Was it Jimmy Stewart? I think it was Jimmy. No, not Jimmy Stewart. Who was it? Well, you could tell who I paid attention to.
Well, one of the, it's so funny because you could say that the reason I love writing witchy books is because of Bewitched and Samantha being expected to give up her powers. And that infuriated me when I was a little girl.
Yes, right. Well, see, by that time, because Bell, Book, and Candle came out in 1958, so it's pretty old, but it kind of set the stage for that sort of story. So, yeah, it's good. It's good. Have we answered all the questions? I think we have. Thank you for all the nice comments, everyone. It's it's lovely to hear from you.
Yes, thank you. And for the questions. It's been awesome. And thank you, Louisa. I love to talk with you.
Yes, it's been great, Willa. Thanks. And thanks for the book, because mine arrived today. I've already read it, but I get my own copy, so that's good.
Oh, Tracy Marie asks, can you tell us that you will never stop writing witchy books?
Well, it's really
I
fun
always
writing
have to have
witches.
something supernatural
Me too.
in my work, and so
Right.
I'm always thrilled to have the opportunity to write it
Yeah, me
and
too.
to write witches.
My agent and I call it my agent and I call it, my new genre is historical with weird, because I love to write
Weird.
historicals, but there's always got to be weird in there somewhere. You can spell it
That's
however you
me.
like.
I love to write empowering stories about women, but there has to be something weird, like you said.
Yes.
So,
Well, women are weird,
yeah.
wonderfully weird. So let's keep that up.
Write what you know.
Yeah, right. Right. I think
You're
we answered them all.
welcome.
Thank you guys, everybody.
Yes. Thank
Read
you
a lot.
all so much.
Everybody stay safe and healthy.